years into Micah started last week. So I don't know if you've studied the prophets or read the prophets lately. I told you last week, the last time I really studied them to teach them was 25 years ago. That's a long time. If you're in our Pew Bible, Micah begins on page 823. And if you can't find Micah, it's probably in that real thin line of white pages in the middle of your Bible that doesn't have any thumb dirt on it. If you need to look at the table of contents, that's okay. I try real hard or at least I'm conscious of it. Maybe it's not evident, but I try to give confidence or to try to convey a sense of you can read and study the Bible and make sense of the Bible. Even the prophets, you can do this. We can do this. It may seem strange or foreign. It may seem hard to understand, hard to make sense of, hard to sort out, hard to see what gives it its coherence that makes sense. That's true. I find that sometimes difficult. If we're reading in Mark, like we did for a long time, I find that pretty accessible. If we're reading one of Paul's letters, I can kind of get in a mode of thought of thinking, all right, Paul's writing a letter, we have a church, there's something going on, let's see what this letter will what kind of purpose does Paul have in mind for this church? And he's making a case to get this church where we need to have them. Okay, and he writes the letter to kind of get us further down that road. I can kind of get in that mode of thought. Or we were in Exodus. Okay, it's a book of the law, but in form it's a lot of narrative, it's a lot of story. Okay, a narrative has a plot, it has characters, it has setting, there's a conflict that we're moving to resolve. I can kind of make sense of that. If you're like me, the names can sometimes be hard to track. So if we get into Kings, and we're going to be in Kings today, 1st, 2nd Samuel is not too bad because there's not many characters. We get into the book of Kings or we get into the book of Chronicles, there's a lot of names. It's harder for me to keep it straight. If that's the case for you, yes, we understand. Okay, we're on the same page. Hard to understand. The prophets, what I tried to do last week, I tried to set up Micah, and we'll do a little more setup today, to set up Micah so that I hope we can understand the riches that this book gives us, to mine the riches that are in a prophet. And what I said last week, let me reiterate, the prophets rely on the kind of the basis for the world of the prophets. The basis is the covenant that God has established with his people. Now, it's helpful that we're not too far out from a study of Exodus. God's decisive act to bring his people out of Egypt for the sake of the promise to Abram, which is what? To bless all people everywhere. We're going to have the descendants of this man in this land for the sake of all. So the backdrop of Genesis 11, all the people of everywhere, you kind of get it's kind of like if you had the globe and you spun the globe, and it's just everyone everywhere. And then of all of those people in Genesis 11, all the list of nation groups, we have one man, Abram. We're going to make a promise to one for the sake of all. Well, Exodus details God's decisive action to bring his people out of slavery in Egypt and into the land, and gives us some of the law. There is a good deal in Leviticus and a whole restatement of it in Deuteronomy. But the narrative of Exodus is very helpful for us when we come to a book like Micah, because Micah rests on the covenant and God's act to form a people and his giving of the law to form a people, that they would exist for the sake of his good purpose for the sake of all people. The prophets come in when things fall apart, when things go sideways, when we'll see in Kings today, when Israel or Judah, as the case may be, do not live out God's intent as exemplified in the giving of the law and the giving of the covenant. So the prophets are God's words to his people to bring them back. Okay, we in our English Bibles have all the prophets collected kind of together as a chunk. And we talked about that last week, and I won't go back and replow any of that ground, but I wanted to start with Micah as we have it, where we have it. And where we have it is one of a lot, 12 prophets. They're at the end of what we would call the Old Testament, or the end of the Scriptures. Okay? If you look at Micah 1:1, that's about all the setup that we get in the book itself. Now I'm going to look at Micah 1:1. I want to go to Hosea and Amos and Isaiah 1:1, the first verse of each of these books. And I'm going to start in Micah 1:1 and go back slowly, because you'll skip it if you can go quickly, to Amos 1:1. And then I'm going to go back even further, slowly, to Hosea 1:1. Good thing I've got 3 fingers. Then I'm going to go back to Isaiah. And you can go more quickly if you want, because there's a lot of Ezekiel to get through, there's a lot of Jeremiah to get through, and there's a lot of Isaiah 1:1. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to put a finger in Isaiah 1:1, Hosea, and Amos. What I suggested last week is the basic unit of thought in a prophet, for a prophet or for a book of prophecy, is the oracle. If we're looking at the Gospels, a basic unit of thought could be a parable story or a miracle story or a set of stories in a row or a sequence of travel. Jesus leaves this place and he comes here and he comes here and then he finally gets to where he's going to be, where he intended to be all along. So there's a little travel sequence. A unit of thought in Matthew could be a section of teaching or speech or discourse like the Sermon on the Mount. All right, that's a unit of thought. A basic unit of thought in one of Paul's letters, you kind of look for words, signal words like and now, or therefore, or and another thing. Okay, look for markers of the progression of thought. Okay? The unit of thought in a book of narrative is often marked off by a geographical or a time stamp. Now on the next day, they went here. Okay? The next day, there have changed time and we've changed location. Marks off units of thought for narrative, or sometimes different people come and go, okay, as we'll see in Kings. Think of it like a play or a drama. The curtain comes up and we have something on stage and the curtain comes down, okay. In prophets, it's an oracle. That's our unit of thought. Thus says the Lord, okay. For Micah, it's 1 verse 2 listen, all you peoples. 3 verse 1, listen, leaders of Jacob. And 6 verse 1, listen to what the Lord is saying. So an oracle is speech from the Lord to reveal something to the people. And the book itself kind of marks those, listen, listen, listen. And what I suggested to you last time is each section has an oracle of doom, that's not good, and an oracle of hope, that is good. An oracle of judgment and an oracle of hope. An oracle of doom and an oracle of restoration. Okay? We get 3 pairs. Each oracle has both components, doom and hope. Okay, so if you want for next week, look at that first oracle, or the first section marked off with the word listen, which is chapter 1, verse 2, all the way through basically what we would call chapter 2. And see, the next one starts at 3, verse 1. Listen, leaders of Jacob. Okay? Basically the first 2 chapters. That's the first pair. We'll do that next week. Look at Micah 1:1. Now let's look at Amos and Hosea and Isaiah. If you struggle with the names, let me give you some hope. So do a lot of us. You're not alone if you struggle with the names. The only thing that I have found helpful, and I have had to tell myself this, and I've tried when I taught high school kids, many of whom this was the first time they'd ever read. I know it was the first time. Many of them had ever taken Bible more than Sunday school. I mean, I had them an hour a day, every day, 5 hours a week. And sometimes that's 3 times longer than they were in church if they went to church. And so this was new, and it was for a grade, and the grades counted. That was kind of a shock. And they said, we don't know. Boy, she was so sweet. She goes, I've never read the Bible. I was like, okay, you're going to do fine. You're just going to have to go slow and realize that a lot of us also struggle. So, go slow. And you don't have to understand all of the names and keep them all. No one's giving you a quiz. And so I never would give them a quiz where they had to memorize names. And I will not do that for you. There is no quiz. You do not have to memorize the names. So what I told my students is my goal is not for you to memorize the names. I said, if that's what you thought I was going to do, that's not what I'm going to do. I'd rather you know where to go to just read about it. The point is not for you to regurgitate a list of names to me. I want you to understand the flow of the story. And by the way, you have the book, you can look up the names. That's the whole point, right? Is I don't want to test you, I want to help you. And if you need to reread, read them again, okay? So what we're going for is not for you to reproduce a list of names. What I will suggest is, if you're going to come back to Kings, and we'll be there in just a second, a sheet of paper divided in half long ways, a column for Israel and a column for Judah. And if you take some notes, well, let's just save that for just a minute. That may be helpful. Where on one sheet of paper you can go back and forth from column A to column B. That may be helpful. Well, let's look at Micah 1:1. This is the setup that we get. The word of the Lord that came to Micah the Morashite. Depending on what version you have, you may have the place name Morasheth spelled a little differently. So you can see already we're in a mode of thinking of the word of the Lord to Micah, an oracle. Here's what the Lord reveals to his people, communicates to his people. What he saw regarding Samaria and Jerusalem in the days of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. Okay? Now, what I want to suggest is just observe that the first verse of Micah gives us geographical place. It gives us a chronological hook, that is, in the sense of it was during the reigns of, it would be like us saying in the Carter administration, and those of us who remember the Carter administration go, oh, yes, I remember that. Okay? How you kind of mark time by the reigns of the leaders or the time where the leaders or the kings ruled. Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. Okay. So the Micah 1:1 gives you a hook and assumes that you know something to hang on the hook. Now, you say to me, I don't know anything about what to hang on that hook. Okay, well, that's okay. But just assume that the writer here gives you a hook and assumes you can hang something on it. And you say, but I don't know what to hang on it. So I'm going to take care of you on that, okay? Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah in Samaria and Jerusalem. Now there's a lot of kind of freight packed under this one verse, okay? Micah, go back to Amos 1:1. The words of Amos, who was one of the sheep breeders from Tekoa, what he saw concerning Israel in the days of King Uzziah of Judah and Jeroboam, son of Jehoash, king of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake. Okay. Notice it's a similar manner of introduction. We have a place of where the prophet is from and a time stamp, we'd say time stamp, a hook of geography and place. Israel and Judah, and a when, during Uzziah's reign, okay. Go to Hosea 1:1. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, son of Beeri, or Beeri, or Beeri, I guess if you want to pronounce it in Texan, right? Son of Beeri, during the reigns of Uzziah. That Uzziah is the same Uzziah of Amos 1:1. Okay. Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. There's our three characters from Micah 1:1. Kings of Judah, and Jeroboam, son of Jehoash, king of Israel. Also one of the characters from Amos. Okay? Now, if that's a lot, it's okay. It is a lot. You may have never seen or heard these names before. They all kind of rhyme. We got the same kind of consonants going on. It's all a mess, all right? It's okay. It's a lot of people. Notice the same phenomenon happens again. A place hook and a geographical hook and a time hook, okay? Notice also these are some of the same names we're seeing repeatedly. Okay, now go to Isaiah 1:1. The vision concerning Judah and Jerusalem that Isaiah, son of Amoz, that's not Amos, that's a different person. This is Amoz, son of Amoz, the one he saw during the reigns of King Uzziah. That's the same Uzziah, okay? Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. So there's our three characters again of Judah. Also notice Isaiah 1 verse 2. Listen, all right? You can see we're in a mode of thought that kind of holds true across the prophets. The mode is an oracle. The prophets receive the oracle. We get a time hook at the beginning, okay? Now, you have just said to yourself, self, I don't know who these people are. I don't know what gives, okay? If you have not read Kings, let's go back to the book of 2 Kings. And if you have to look at the table of contents, that's okay. our Pew Bible, along about page 332, 333. We're in 2 Kings, about chapter 15-ish. We'll be in that neighborhood. It seems safe to assume that the writer of the prophets assume that the readers of the prophets can make meaningful sense of those hooks at the beginning of the documents. That he doesn't retell the whole narrative, but he references it, and we say, aha, I remember the Carter administration. I remember the Reagan administration. We would say in presidential terms. I remember things were very different under, ruler X as opposed to ruler Y. We think in similar terms. Okay? It was never so bad as it was under our political opponent, and it was never so good as it was under our political ally. Okay, we often think of those chronological hooks and then attach kind of meaning to it, how good it was or how bad it was. Okay? If we lived through the time, we would remember. There's a lot of memory that gets collapsed into a very brief memory. Way to remember. We kind of distill it down, and it was either positive or negative. Okay. Now, if you're looking at the book of Kings, we're looking at a summary narrative of the kings of Israel and Judah. And there's a lot that we can get condensed down into a brief evaluative statement. So in other words, this is not a chronicle of everything that happened. This is a summary of what happened and an evaluation of it. And it's the summary and evaluation that's probably the most important thing about the books of Kings as we go through the rulers and kind of tell you how it is we got to where we are. And it's the evaluation that seems to be most helpful. The book of 2 Kings gives us a description of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, the three characters mentioned in Micah 1:1. We'll also tell you about Uzziah, who's mentioned in Amos and Isaiah. In other words, we get some of the narrative that Micah, or the prophets, assume we know. Okay? Whoever writes the book of Kings, it looks like, is helping us understand how it is we got to Babylon. How did we get here? And all parts of that question are important. How did we get here? Who's the we? We, children of Israel, children of Abram. How did we get here? Where's the here? Babylon. How did the children of Abram get out of the land? The promised people, bless you, out of the promised land. That is not just a geographical question, that's a doctrinal question, a theological question. Why? Because the promise is for the children of Abram in this land for the sake of all people. And we are his children, but we are not in our land. That's not just a geographical question, that is a theological question. How did we get here? Okay, the narrator will tell us how we got here. And let's look at 2 Kings 15 and look at his evaluation of King Jotham. And it is just wonderful because in about 5 verses we get kind of it's almost a prototypical way that the author of Kings narrates about the kings. We get a narrative summary and an evaluation. And this, in miniature, is kind of what he does all the way through Kings. We're going to advance the storyline about how we got here and help you understand what it means. Okay? That's how I approach the book of Kings. Now, I realize we're jumping into chapter 15 in the middle of the second book. Okay? If you wanted to read Samuel and Kings and have a sheet of paper, draw a line down the middle, long ways, and on one column, Israel, and the other, Judah, because what the narrator of the book is going to do is going to tell you about Israel, and then he's going to tell you about Judah. Now, the people of Israel, the nation of Israel, the unified kingdom of David and Solomon, splits and fractures, civil war among the children of Israel, two kingdoms where there was one. Well, you mean they split? Yes, they split. Read about it in Kings, which will tell you how the unified people of nation of Israel split, civil war of sorts, and he's going to alternate between Israel and Judah. The northern tribes take the name of Israel, Judah and Benjamin take the name of Judah in the south. So we have a split in the unified kingdom of David and Solomon, Israel in the north, Judah in the south. So when we read, like in the prefaces to the prophets, Micah, Amos, Hosea, Isaiah, the kings of Israel or the kings of Judah, we're talking about two different variants of the unified people of God. Everyone's Jewish, but it is not synonymous to speak of Israel and Judah. It reflects a divided situation within the people of Israel. Israel and Judah. Okay? In other words, we understand when if someone were talking about America in 1880s, or how about the 1840s, and they were saying, oh, the United States, it was all the same across the board, and we all say, obviously you haven't been here, you haven't studied it, it's very much not the same everywhere. What do you mean? Well, the nation was divided. I mean, right straight across the middle. So it wasn't a solitary, it was a solitary entity, but it was also very much not. So when you say the north or the south, those of us who are from these parts, like, aha, now I think I understand a little better, okay? Now, when you say Israel and Judah, you're reflecting a divided situation among the Jews. Israel in the north, north of what? North of Palestine. I wish we had a map. We had a map, okay? Northern Palestine, okay? Around, say, the city of Jerusalem up into Galilee. The kingdom of Judah, in and around Jerusalem and ish that way, kind of in the south, okay? Look at 2 Kings 15. Now, I realize we're jumping into the middle. So if you were to read Kings, draw a line down the middle of the sheet of paper, and he's going to alternate between Israel and Judah. And when he does, realize those are loaded geographical terms. It's not synonymous, Israel and Judah. He's talking about two different entities. Well, the formula of how he discusses everybody is just pretty well encapsulated in this evaluation of Jotham. In the second year of Israel's king Pekah, son of Remaliah, Jotham, son of Uzziah, became king of Judah. Okay, that was a lot of setup to help you unpack that one verse. Okay? So if you're reading and you'd started from the beginning and you alternate between Israel and Judah, you will already have understood that reference to Pekah, okay? Because we already talked about him. I'm not going to mention anything about him except to say we, the readers of King, we've already talked about him. You already have a chronological hook. Realize we've already talked about him. Now we're going to come down here in Judah. Okay. He was 25, so we're going to get an age and some years. He was 25 years old when he became king. He reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jerushah, daughter of Zadok. Now here's the evaluation. He did what was right in the Lord's sight, just as his father Uzziah had done. This is a prototypical, this is going to hold true across the board. We're going to get a one-sentence description. Are these kings good or bad? This one, good. Okay. Yet, the high places were not taken away. The people continued sacrificing and burning incenses on the high places. In this case, he qualifies it. He's basically a good king. Well, things weren't totally the way they should be. Okay, now remember, there's a lot of water under the bridge we've skipped over to get to the middle of this book. Okay. Jotham built the upper gate of the Lord's temple. The rest of the events of Jotham's reign, along with all his accomplishments, are written in the historical record of Judah's kings. Almost like he says, now, if you want to read more, everything is in the Chronicles. Okay? Not our book of Chronicles, but in the archive, so to speak. In those days, the Lord began sending Aram's king Rezin and Pekah, son of Remaliah, against Judah. Okay. Jotham rested with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of his ancestor David. His son Ahaz became king in his place. End of story for Jotham. Okay, it's all about end of story for us too, because I hear voices. Okay, that is a very good example of what Kings does. You get the summary, you get an evaluation. This reveals to us the spiritual condition of Judah was not awful, but it was not where it should be. The king, basically a good king. There's a lot that we could say about the Carter administration, but we just kind of summarize it in one sentence. There's a lot we could say about the Reagan administration, but we summarize it in one sentence. Okay? There's a lot we could say about Jotham, but we summarize it in one sentence. That's what the author of Kings does. He moves through time and he evaluates the kings. Jotham, he was pretty good, is what we would say. Were the high places taken out? No. Is that a problem? Yeah. But that's kind of Jotham. Okay? What about the next one? Well, we won't go to it today, but go into 2 Kings 16, and we'll read about Ahaz. Not good. And they tell you how. Then Hezekiah. Better. And they tell you how. Okay? So the situation in Judah that Micah reflects, we read about 2 Kings basically 15 through 20. So if you want to reread 2 Kings 15 through 20, that will give you some of the setup that our writer, Micah, our prophet, assumes you know in Micah 1:1. And we'll look at the first oracle, which is Micah chapters 1 and 2, next week. Time just goes by so quick, doesn't it? It's already 9:40. I owe you 2 minutes. Okay? We'll pick up there next week, and we'll be in good shape.